Okay, can everybody hear?
Yes,
Okay, good. I guess the computer connection's a little better this week. Um, okay, so welcome to everyone. We'll start. I guess we can start.
yes, please.
Yeah, that was a rhetorical, but thank you. Um, okay, so in the middle of discussing the issue of Tsaras Erba, so let's get back to where we were for a minute. We're on Dav Gimel Amud Aleph here in Yevamos. You also have it on the sheets. So let's go to the background again. So the Mishnah tells us that there are 15 women, 15 categories of women that are in the category of arayos, meaning where there's an illicit, uh, you know, relationship that would prevent any course sort of marriage. Chayve krisos, these are called erva, a person's daughter, a person's mother-in-law, a person's sister-in-law, meaning his wife's sister, his daughter-in-law, and so on and so forth, his sister from his mother. All these 15 women, says the Mishnah, that's what the words mean in the Mishnah. Chamesh esrei nashim, there are 15 categories of women that potros tsaraseim v'tsaras tsaraseim min achalitza min ayibum ad sofa olam. That's how the Mishnah and then the Sechta begins. If they are part of the mix of family, in other words, let's say one more time, let's say Ruvain, let's say you have three brothers, Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. So if Ruvain is married to two women, one is his niece, Shimon's daughter, Shimona we're calling her, and the other one is Sarah. So Sarah is not connected in any way to Shimon before she married his brother Ruvain. Shimona is connected to Shimon. That's why she's called Shimona, because she's the daughter of Shimon, but he's allowed to marry his niece. So if Ruvain has these two wives and then Ruvain dies without producing any children, so that's a Yibum situation. And what the Mishnah is telling us is that Shimon, the brother, is not, there is no Yibum and there's no Chalitza, not for Shimona, his daughter, and not for his daughter's co-wife, Sarah, either. That's the din of the Mishnah. So basically, what the Mishnah is telling us is that there are two types of exclusions or exemptions. One is if one of the candidates for Yibum is an erva, so then there's no din of Yibum v'chalitza. That isn't completely simple, but that's easier to understand. And then there's a bigger chiddush, and that is that Saras erva, the co-wife of the erva, in this case, Shimona, the daughter of Shimon, is the erva. Sarah, the other wife, is called the Tsaras erva because she's the rival or co-wife of the erva. So both of them, even the Tsaras erva, even Sarah, who otherwise has no separate or independent relationship with Shimon, even she is excluded from Ibum and from Chalitz. That's the Mishnah's Chiddush. And if there was a third brother, Levi, so let's say Levi was able to do Yibum with Sarah. Again, Ruvain had two wives, Sarah and Shimona. So let's say Levi did Yibum with Sarah, because she's a good candidate for Yibum to Levi, just not to Shimon. And then let's say Levi had another wife called Rachel, let's say. I'm sorry, we'll call her Leah. So basically, Leah and Sarah are the two wives of Levi now, one through Yibum and one through regular wife. And then let's say Levi dies without leaving children. So now we're back to looking at Shimon to solve the problem. But now Shimon is encountering Leah, who he has no connection with, except that Leah is the co-wife of Sarah, who was the co-wife of Shimona. So that's called tsaras erva. It's a little complicated. A double tsaras erva. And that too, says the Mishnah, is excluded. That's what it means ad sof koladoros. If you have enough brothers to go around, and the tragedies of their early death without producing children continue, so you could have tsaras, as many as you can. So that's what the Mishnah says. So the Gemara wants to know. So what we are interested in figuring out is what is the nature of this din of tsaras erva? Like, why is it? Meaning that an erva is not a candidate for yibum. That I think most of us can understand that very well. If a person can't marry his own daughter, even for the sake of producing an heir for his deceased brother, because that's an illicit relationship. It's not the regular illicit relationship of Eshes Achiv, which is suspended, right, or overridden, as the case may be in the case of Yibum. It's a different relationship. It's a relationship, that has nothing to do with being a sister-in-law. It has to do with being a daughter or being a mother-in-law, etc. So the reason that the erva is excluded from Yibum and from Chalitza, we still have to examine in the Gemara. Do you need a limud for that? Could it have been otherwise? But the din per se is pretty compelling, not difficult to justify. However, far more puzzling and intriguing is this chiddush that a tsaras erva, that the co-wife of the erva, is also excluded. Why? I mean, she is not, related to him, any more than anyone else is, except that she's his sister-in-law, meaning the wife of his brother. But that's what yibum is. Yibum is when there is a wife of the brother and the brother has no heirs, and the wife of the brother, instead of being prohibited, becomes a yibum candidate. So what's wrong with Sarah? Why can't? And indeed, Beis Shammai in the Mishnah Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph actually says that there is no din, there's no gam, there's no problem of a tzara serva. Beis Shammai disagrees with Beis Hillel on this point. It's a matter of contention between them. So what we're trying to figure out is what is the problem and what are the parameters of this din of tsaras erva. So the Gemara, in its discussion of that, says, this is the Gemara in Gimel Amid Aleph, my area the Tani Potros, Lisni Osros. The Gemara originally is interested in the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the 15 women exempt Potros, their tsaros, from Yibam and Chalitza. And the Gemara says, well, why do you say potros? Say osros, because that's a more accurate term. Exemption sounds like an option. I exempt you from your final exam. That means, you should be taking it. If you wanted to, do the right thing, you would take it, but I'm exempting you, right? Sounds like you have a choice. You can accept the exemption or you can, you can take the exam. So if I say, that tsaros erva are exempted from yibam and chalitza, so that's how Rashi interprets the Gemara's question. It sounds like, if they don't want to subject themselves to yibum and chalitza, that's perfectly fine. But if they do want to, then they can be a yibum candidate. Why not? So wouldn't it be better to use the phrase osros, which makes it completely unequivocal that there's no choice, that because they're tsaras erva, because there's an erva in the mix, in the candidate pool, so the tsaras erva is excluded whether she wants to be or not. That's the Gemara's question. Why use the expression potros? Why not say ostros? So originally the Gemara thought there could be other reasons. Itani ostros havamina oseliyabeim avamiklat skolza kamashman. So the Gemara says, oh, because if it said potros, then we would think that there's no yibum, but maybe there is chalitza. If it said ostros, we'd say there's no yibum, but maybe there is chalitza. There's a requirement of chalitza. So then the Gemara says kamashma. So the Gemara says, well, then why not say bilisni asura lachlot? Why do you say potros? You should say asura lachlot. Says the Gemara, well, my ka'avid, because there's no problem. There's no iser to do chalitza, just not necessary. But there's no bracha levatala. There's no act of arayos. So,
really, anyone can do chalitza to anybody. There's no.
I mean, it's meaningless.
I mean, I thought it means something.
What?
I thought when someone does chalitza, it means something.
Meaning, what the Gemara is saying is that why not say when the Gemara says my kavod? Originally, they're saying, it's not asur. It's just not effective. Doesn't do anything. It's not needed, and doesn't accomplish anything. So then the Gemara says, well, Bidrabanan, it probably should be Asur, because if you do Chalitza when you don't need it and it doesn't accomplish anything, it still gives the impression that there's a Zika. And if there's a Zika, then maybe there would be a Yibum. That's what the Gemara says, Allah Malo, Imata Omer, Koletzes, Mizyavemes. Because if you, say, oh, it's prohibited to do, you could do the Chalitza if you don't say it's Asur. So then the impression would be there's a Zika, and once there's a Zika, then maybe you should do Yibum too. And doing Yibum is certainly, not something that is, a Rishus or neutral, because that involves Erva. So the Gemara says, no, that we need a better answer for the Potros and the Osros. So then the Gemara's answer to explain why we use the expression Potros and not Osros is actually quite sensational. The Gemara says, Kivin di b'makom mitzvah hu da asira tzara, v'shalo b'makom mitzvah shari, v'shumachi tani Potros. We read this last time. I'm getting back to it because we didn't finish our analysis. So the Gemara says basically the following. The term Potros, and I'll read according to Rashi. The term Osros and the term Potros would signify two different conceptual approaches to what Tsaras Erva is all about. And this is how Rashi explains it. Rashi says, if we use the word Potros, which is what we do, it's because in the end of the day, the way Tsaras Erva works is as follows. It's a misnomer a little bit. It's a misleading phrase, because the phrase implies that there is a category of Erva, and then there's a category of, I'll call it virtual Erva, or Erva by association. In other words, there's a daughter. If a daughter is an Erva, a mother-in-law is an Erva, a sister is an Erva, and then the co-wife of a daughter, the co-wife of a mother-in-law, the co-wife of a sister, right, has the din of an Erva. That's what Tsaras Erva sounds like. However, maybe that isn't how it works at all. The real way that it works is that it's a two-step process. What is a two-step process? It's as follows. The brother dies and he leaves two wives, let's say, right? Could be 10 wives, but let's say, simplify it. The brother Ruvain dies and he leaves two wives, right? Shimona, the daughter of Shimon, his niece, and Sarah, right? So what really happens, says Rashi, is that since Shimona is in the mix and she's his daughter, that determines that there is no Zika for anyone. Because the rule is, I made up this language, but it's Zika for one, Zika for all. If there's no Zika for all, right, there's no Zika for one. Meaning, Zika is a collective concept. Either all the wives in question are omdos leyibum ulechalitza. If any of them is not, then none of them are. So it really happens in Tsaras Erva, says Rashi, lahalacha, and that's why we use the word potros, is that there's an erva in the mix. The erva in the mix cancels the zika, not only for herself, but for her fellow wives, her co-wives, her rival wives as well. Now, once there's no zika, then what you have is the situation of Eishasach, Shelo b'makom mitzvah sibum. You have a regular Eishasach, as if there were children, or where there's no mitzvah of yibum, and that's also prohibited. So a tsaras erva, says Rashi, is not really an extended erva by virtue of the other erva. It's the other erva undercutting zika, and when there's no zika, everybody reverts to what they used to be, which is an eishasach shelo b'makom mitzvah sibum. Let's say there were children, right? Or let's say there was a divorce and not a death. He can't marry his brother's former wife because that's eishasach. So every tsaras erva isn't really a tsaras erva. Tsaras erva is a description of the case. When there's an erva in the mix, there's no zika. When there's no zika, then it's Eshes Achiv Hametz. That's what Rashi says. Dibra Maska, look at the Rashi now. That's Kivin de b'makom mitzvah sibum huda asira, says Rashi, Soras habas, right? Ukenim farish b'masnisin, demisha patra kosav mizika sibum. If there's a daughter in the mix, so then the Torah exempts you from the zika, exempts everybody from the zika, and therefore kaimale be'eshasach sheyesh labanim, and therefore all the wives, how many ever there are, become eshasach shelo b'makom ibum. And that, as Rashi says, potros, because the reason that's called potros is because it's a two-step process and it's mimela. Really what happens is the erva knocks out the zika, and once there's no zika, mimela, everybody's an eshasach, and everybody is excluded from ibum and chalitza. However, says Rashi, if the Mishnah had used the expression not potros but osros, then you would have thought that the way that Tsaras Erva works is different. The way that it works is a virtual or extended or by association concept of Erva. Meaning, if you are the co-wife of an Erva, you too, are forbidden to that person as if you were the Erva. Meaning, the co-wife of a daughter, right, is treated for the purposes of Yibum as if she were also the erva of a daughter. Then you would use the expression osros because it's the daughter or the mother-in-law or the sister, whoever the erva is, that transfers, let's say, the ilu or the, virtually, the status of erva to the tzara. So now it's a tzaras erva. You have a bas and a tzaras habas. You have an achos and you have tzaras achos. That would be called conceptually asuros. However, if that were true, says the Gemara, this is what Rashi's trying to explain, then why would we limit the din of tzaras erva only to yibum? Why wouldn't we apply it in general? What do you mean in general? In the following case. So let's say you have Ruvain, back to Ruvain. Let's say Ruvain marries his daughter. Forget about it. Let's say Ruvain doesn't even have brothers. If not, we're not talking about Yibum at all. We're talking about Ruvain looking for a son-in-law for his daughter. Okay? Why don't we stick with Shimon? Okay, forget it. I'll stick with Ruvain. Okay, Ruvain is looking for a good son-in-law, a good husband for his daughter. Okay, his daughter Reuvena. So he marries Reuvena off to Pinchas. That's his son-in-law, Pinchas. Pinchas has an additional wife, right, called Sarah. So Pinchas has two wives, Reuvena, right, who's Reuven's daughter, which makes Pinchas Reuven's son-in-law, and he has a second wife called Sarah. Now, what happens if Pinchas dies? Right? Let's say Reuven decides that he would like to marry, he can't marry his daughter, Khalila, that's Reuvena, but let's say he wants to marry the other wife of Pinchas, right? Namely Sarah. Can Reuven marry his deceased son-in-law's other wife, Sarah, or not? Isn't she a tsaras erva? Because she is the co-wife of, right, Reuven's daughter, Reuvena. So why not say she's a tsaras erva and she should be excluded from marrying Reuven in the same way that in the context of Yibum we say that if Shimon has a daughter, Shimona, and she has a co-wife named Sarah, right, then both of them are excluded from Yibum because of tsaras erva. Why not apply the same principle of tsaras erva even when there's no Yibum? So that is how Rashi interprets the Gemara. That's what the words mean in the Gemara when the Gemara says, Kivin din b'makom mitzvah hudasira tzara. The only time that we apply the din of tsaras erva is in Yibum. But shalo b'makom mitzvah shari, outside of Yibum, if we were just talking about a co-wife of, an erva who was the son-in-law, the son-in-law's other wife, right, in addition to this person's daughter, right, there we don't have a principle of tsaras erva. And therefore, that proves that what is, says Rashi, what's the nature of Tsaras Erva? It's a din in Eshes Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah Sibum. It's not a din in the concept of Tsaras Erva, an extended Tsaras Erva, because otherwise it should have applied even outside of Yibum. That's how Rashi interprets the Gemara. However, then I'm getting back to where we left off last week. What I was trying to show was that the Ramban, the Ra'ah, the Ritva, sometimes the Meiri, they don't agree with Rashi. They think that even in Yibum, the din of Tsaras Erva is an extension of the Erva itself. In other words, it's not because, since there's no Zika, there is therefore everybody's an Eshes Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah. That is something, that's how Rashi interprets. They don't think that's correct. What they think is that there's a concept of erva, and then there's an extended concept of erva by association, but that's only in Yibum. Why is it only in Yibum? Why is it only in Yibum? So maybe the answer is because it's only in Yibum where we look at the collective wives of a person as a group. Outside of Yibum, there's no reason to look at them as a unit. In Yibum, you have to look at them as a unit because the whole idea of Yibum is lahakim la'achiv shem b'Yisrael, and you have to work with his previous family. If he has more than one wife, then they're all in the same boat together, basically. And therefore, we look at them together as co-wives. There's a group, a sorority, we'll call it, of wives, who are now subject to Yibum or Chalitza. But when it comes to anything other than Yibum, what do you mean there's a collection of, or a collective, or a unit of wives, or a sisterhood of wives? There's no sisterhood. He's married to this one, he's married to that one. They don't have any other bond between them. In Yibum, they're bonded because the Zika applies to both of them at the same time. It's a Zika of the bias. And that's actually, when we speak about the spurning of the Yavam, if he refuses to Yibum in the context of Chalitza, it's because he's ignoring to be Bone Yivne base Achiv, his brother's bias. And that bias includes whatever base Ozuishto. So if there's more than one wife, it includes the group of wives that he has. That's exactly what it is. But outside of Yibum, there's no collective wives. He's married to A, he's married to B, he's married to C, he's married to D. But they're not a group. There's nothing that makes them into a group outside of Yibum. So maybe that's the pshat, why, and that's the difference between Potros and Osros, meaning what we're saying, according to the other view, the Ramban, the Ra'an, I'm going to show you where I see this in just a minute. What we're saying, according to them, is that there's a category called Tsaras Erva, an association of Erva, even if it's not the Erva, but it's connected to the Erva, that is also a problem, but only in Yibum, because only in Yibum is there a strong identification or association between the various wives. Outside of Yibum, we don't have this din, even though you might have thought that there would be, because we just don't have that kind of bonding or binding, category, of neshe, habal. Now, before I document it a little further, so we saw it already in some of the Lashonos of the Ritva, but I want to now get back to the Gemara Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, Tsaras Sota, to show you one place where we see it very explicitly, and then, maybe some others as well. Before I do, everybody is with me? Anybody have a question at this point, or is everybody following?
When you answer questions, there are no questions.
I'm sorry?
I was making a joke. I said, when you ask for questions, they have no questions.
I hear that. Okay, it's a good joke. Right. Anyways, okay. So let's not say that I didn't give you the opportunity. Right. Okay, great. So we have, basically, to sum up, we have two perspectives on how this very innovative doctrine of the halacha that there's something called a tsaras erva. We have two perspectives on how that works. Okay, one way that it works, according to one perspective that works, is simply the erva knocks out the zika, and therefore all the candidates, all the former wives of the deceased brother, become or revert to being what they always were, which is Eshes Achiv Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah. The reason it's Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah is because the erva torpedoed the Zika.
The Zika.
Yeah. So that's one, and that's the most popular approach. And the second approach is no, it's really a bigger chiddush even, and that is there's something called an Eitzaras erva, meaning not only is the erva excluded from certain relationships, but the association with an erva, here the association meaning serving as a co-wife, being part of the group of wives, one of which is an erva, marks or defines or identifies, the other wives also as tsaros erva, and that association, tsaras erva, at least in the context of Yibum, has implications and exempts that all the tsaros in addition to the erva as well. Okay. So let me document it in one way, quite clearly. So let's turn for the moment to the Gemara on Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, 11a in the Gemara. And this is 2/3 of the way down the page, or 3/5 of the way down the page. I'm not sure exactly. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Everybody have that on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph? I can get you the exact line number.
1 second. Where is it, Rabbi? Where did you say?
Yud Aleph.
Yud Aleph, yeah.
And it is 3, 6, 9, about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page.
And how does it begin?
And it begins Yehuda, or if you see the last words on the line before, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. It should be 10 or 11 lines up from the bottom of the page on Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph. Everybody have that?
Okay, I'll find it. Okay.
You got it?
Just about. Okay, I'm listening. I'm sorry.
No, I want to make sure you have it. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav.
Since we stopped for a second, you said something that made a lot of sense, of course. I don't remember who is the who is the one who
Good to know.
who is the one who said the bayit. The bayit makes a lot of sense, because if it is the bayit, why do we have to go through the whole shaklavataria on this way or that way, the tsaras and erva? If it's a bayit, either yes or no. Right? We simplify it more.
Right. Well, I think we are saying that in a way, even when we, no matter what we say, meaning the idea that once there is an erva, that affects all of the rest of the wives as well, no matter how that works. So we're suggesting two different ways that works. One is that it eliminates the Zika for everyone, and everybody becomes an Eshes Ach Shelo B'Makom mitzvah. Or if you don't want to say that, so we're saying, well, it stamps each one of the wives as a tsaras erva. Both of those, I'm suggesting, are unique to Yibum, because Dafka and Yibum we look at everything together because it is a bias.
But there are other times.
By the way, on Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol makes the vidui, on his own par, he speaks about beso, and that's how we know that he has to be Kohen Gadol Nasi. He has to be married, because beso is uishto. And when the Sforno in his parish on Parshas Kitetse speaks about Yibum, and how it works, he also talks about binyan abayis, about trying to rebuild or build, the home of his deceased brother.
But the
This is a very
concept
big idea, and you'll
concept
see later on in the psukim, Asher lo yibaneh beis achiv, that we darshan from it as well. We learn dinim from it, so it's considered to be a very important phrase, and it has important implications. I agree with that. Okay,
the concept of a kad exists in other parts of halacha, no?
the concept of what?
Of a kad, of a group belonging together. You can't.
Yeah, but not necessarily a group of wives. Especially remember they're rivals, and if anything, it's not like, it's not, but it's fascinating. Torah uses the expression tsara. I've been talking about them to make it understandable. I've been talking about them as a group, a unit, a sorority, a sisterhood, but really a tsara means a rival. Really, when we talk about, having more than one wife, we're talking about splitting affection, and it creates all sorts of tensions, which is probably why it never was an ideal. And I mean, again, you have even the story of, Rachel and Leah, who were two sisters devoted to each other, obviously. We know that from Chazal. And look at the tensions that you had even then between them. And how could it be otherwise? Talk about an emotional, conundrum, right? Baal ki ishto, ishto kabal, and then you have more than one. So the idea, you're right, the concept of a unit, of an integrated unit, of a kad, of this and that, is something that we are familiar with. But the idea that soros, rivals for affection, where humanly, and also halachically, you're skating on very tense, thin ice. The idea that would be a unit, generally, is not particularly attractive. But in Yibum, of course, it is, because the whole point in Yibum is, that you have to produce from the aggregate of his married life, and only from one, but you get to choose, but it's one of, and therefore we're thinking as a unit, you have to choose, a way to lahakim la'akiv shem b'Yisrael.
But all of
so there you have it, but you don't really have it in other. If you're talking about shalom b'makom yibum, then it's back. I would emphasize the fact that it's called tsaros. People
but
joke.
All of the ervas, basically, the closer the relationship, the greater the potential for the erva.
Yeah, of course.
So if these wives are that closely related to each other, that creates the concept of.
Right, but all I'm saying is it only does that in Yibum. It doesn't do it anywhere else. That's the point. Meaning, again, if Pinchas marries Shimon's daughter, Shimona, and he has another wife named Sarah, right? We don't say that Sarah is excluded as a future wife of Shimon after Pinchas dies. We don't say Tzaras Erva there. That's what the Mishnah on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph tells us. We don't say that, and that's what the Gemara in Gimel Amud Aleph is telling us, and Gimel Amud Beis, and then Ches Amud Aleph, and Ches Amud. The Gemara it's almost like, there's this.
But we do have this situation, for example, of a stepmother, and who's not related at all to the child, yet there's the Torah looks askance at any relationship that had anything to do with the father.
Right. So I think I use that as a kind of a paradigm, but let's remember that at least is the wife, of the husband, not the co-wife of the wife of the husband.
I hear you. Yeah.
So it's always it's a huge step. I'll just, before I get to this nafkami, I'll just but it's related to it also. The Gemara in Gimel Beis, which we'll get to very soon, if not today, then hopefully next week. The Gemara says, Azhara Shamanu, says the Gemara on the bottom of Gimel Beis, Azhara Shamanu, Onesh Minalan, which means, okay, fine, good. And now we know that he's not allowed to marry a yavam is not allowed to be miyabim a tsaras erva. But how do you know that he get the onish of kares? So the Gemara ends up giving the answer, but it's very fascinating. Like, we'll get back to it. Like, why once you say that it's erva, how could you distinguish? But if it's tsaras erva as a category, then of course you could distinguish. She's not your daughter. And she's
Well,
not your.
we distinguish in murder, for example, as what the punishment is also depending upon, even though it's all murder, or all capital, not murder, capital crimes in the Torah, we have different kinds of punishment for it.
Okay, right. But all I'm saying is, of course, to me, the bigger chiddush is that there would be the same onesh. Not how do you know? Not that there wouldn't. If you look at Chesam and Aleph, we'll see these two Gemaras. Chesam and Aleph, the Gemara says, it's Tzaras Erva, this kares. On Gimel Amid Beis, the Gemara says, how do you know this kares? It's like two different perspectives. But which one is the more? So the answer is like this. If you hold like Rashi, that everybody becomes an Eishes Ach Shalom Makom Yibum, then of course there has to be.
Everybody would be the same.
It has to be the same. But if it's a chiddush that there's like, just like there's guilt there's erva by association only for Yibum, it's not so obvious that you'd have the same onesh, because the whole thing is so.
It'd be more equivalent to the tumah degradation of each level.
Yeah. So speaking of tumah, that's why I want to get back to this Gemara that I started to mention last time, and that's the Gemara in Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. I want to show you that the Ravid, the Ra'ah, explicitly in this case, but you'll see even the Ramban and the Ritva in another case, they can't hold like Rashi. So let me explain. Everybody has it now? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. This is
Yud Aleph Amud Aleph.
Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a.
Okay.
So the Gemara says Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Tzaras Sota Asura. Very few lines in the Gemara.
In other words, cannot go into Yibum.
Oh, so what is it? 1 second. Tuma ksiv be karayos. What's the case? So look at Rashi. Rashi says Tzaras Sota Asura. Rashi is very helpful, as always. Beit Nashim. He was married to two. Let's say Ruvain, right? Ruvain had two wives. The Zinsa Ha'achas Tachtav. One of them betrayed him, meaning she was unfaithful to him. Let's say he had two wives. We'll call them, Rachel and Leah. Okay, so let's say Rachel was betrayed him.
But why are you bringing two sisters? Why not two completely
not
different?
Two sisters.
Rachel and Leah are sisters.
No sisters.
You just picked two names.
Two. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you mean because of the example I gave?
Yeah.
Okay, so Yentl and Fruma. Okay. So let's say Ruvain was married. Ruvain had two wives, Yentl and Fruma.
Okay.
Right? Yentl and Fruma are not related to each other at all. They're not sisters. They're not. You can have two wives or sisters, right?
Sure.
Anyways, so two different women, Yentl and Fruma. Let's say Yentl was Sota. She betrayed him. Right? She was unfaithful. And Fruma was a good wife till the very end.
That's why she has the name Fruma.
Yeah. V'yesh Edim, and this is not something that is a rumor or a suffix. We know that Yentl was unfaithful. Umeis Balaban, then in addition to his problems with Yentl, he has worse problems. He dies without having any children. So Ruvain dies and he leaves two wives. Yentl, right,
and
who was also Sota, and Fruma, who is, Kshera, V'yashara, the Chol HaDevarim.
Okay. Once he dies, the Sota process stops, right?
So this is what's going on. In one respect, but this is the Chiddush of this Gemara. This is the Chiddush of Rav.
Because he has to be the accuser in order for the Sota process to work, and if he's dead, he can't be.
No. This is a Sota Vadai because This isn't, you know, kinui no stira.
So this is not sota. This is somebody who's chayiv misa, basically. What you're saying.
It's called sota vadai, but so yesh edim umeis below banim, he v'tzarasa peturos af min chalitza. Wow.
Why
So she,
why should Fuma be pturos? Yeah.
so Fruma is excluded because she's the tsaras sota. This is what I want to discuss. And Yentl is also not so simple, is excluded because she's a sota. 1 second. My taima. So the Gemara says, why is this true? And you have to understand, not everybody agrees that this is true. This is the Chiddush of Rav. Others disagree with Rav. I'll explain why in a minute. So the Gemara says, Tumaksiv be karayos. Rashi explains, my taima, tumaksiv be v'nistra v'hinitma, karayos tiksiv al titamu bechol eleb. Now let's take a step back for a moment.
Doesn't this start with the logic that since he's stepping into the brother's shoes, and since the brother is no longer able to have a relationship with the wife, so then he can't have the relationship either?
Wow. Okay, but does that mean there shouldn't be any chalitza and that there should be tsaras sota?
Well, she's eliminated. She doesn't exist.
Even she being eliminated
can't
is
have the
not so
relationship with
obvious.
her. And once you can't have a relationship with one, we have the law that if you can't have a relationship with one,
I mean,
you
you can't have a relationship with her because she was prohibited to the husband, but she was only chayve lavet. She wasn't chayve krisus. It's not like the kedushin was paka.
Well, if he was still alive,
let me ask you a different story. Let's say in a regular
to continue the marriage with her, right?
I understand, but let's say a regular chayve lavet situation. Let's say an almana lekoin gadol or a grusha lekoin hedjo is a candidate for yibum. You have a requirement.
She's just a chayve lavim. She had an extra while she's married. She had an adulterous relationship.
So she to him going forward is chayve lavin
to the husband.
To the husband, not chayve krisis.
Okay.
That's why this is a big chiddush.
But still, still, he has to leave her, no?
Yes, because it's chayve lavin.
Okay, so if he has to leave her, then whoever steps into his shoes has to leave her.
But it's still chayve lavin, not chayve krisis. Let's say a regular chayve lavin. Let me make it clear. The erva of the Mishnah, about which we say tsaras are chayve krisis and more. Chayve krisis is the minimum, and there's no tfisas kedushin. If a person tries to marry his stepmother, or his mother, or his sister, or his daughter, or his wife's sister, when his wife is still alive, even after gerushin, the kedushin is not
non-entity because it's a chayve krisis.
Chayve krisis, kedushin is not chal.
But according to Rabbi Akiva and chayve lavim, it wouldn't be chal either.
We'll get to Rabbi Akiva, but we'll leave Rabbi Akiva out of it for now. Right, Rabbi Akiva has a different perspective. That's true on mamzerus, on tfisas kedushin, but let's leave Rabbi Akiva out of it for now. We definitely Rabbi Akiva is discussed on Daf Tes Omid Aleph, and the Rishonim on Tes Omid Aleph discuss Rabbi Akiva, and we'll get back to Rabbi Akiva. I promise. It's on my list.
So his problem right now is not that she's also to chayve lavim, but she's also to technicality because he was also to the husband and he steps into the shoes of the husband. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the tzara should be also to him.
So there are two problems. Number one, let me say it this way. The typical ptur from Yibum and Chalitza is our Mishnah. Right? By the way, just to highlight, I'm going to just give me 1 more minute to highlight it. If you look on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph, where we kind of are about to pick up, although we're still missing a few lines, the Gemara asks the following question. The Gemara relates to this problem of Saras Sota already here on Daf Gimel. So let me explain what I mean. The Gemara says on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph, right, the second to last line, the last 2 words, Minyana de Reisha Lamute Mai, Minyana de Seifa Lamute Mai. What does that mean? So whenever the Mishnayos give you a number and they give you a list, it's very typical for the Gemara to say, like, what's going on here? Can't we all can add? Like the Mishnah, Rabbi Roth's about to say, the Mishnah in Kol Gadol, right? The Mishnah says that there are 39 avos malacha, right? And then it lists them. And then the Gemara says, why it says, why does the Mishnah need to tell us there are 30? Arbaim chasarachas, 40 minus 1, there are 39 avos malacha. So the Gemara says, why do you need to tell us that there are 39? We can all add. You just start adding them up. Zoreach, Horesh, Akotzar, Ma'amer, Adash. You add them all up, you'll get to 39. Why do you need to tell us that there are 39? So the Gemara says it teaches you something. It's to exclude some other cases. So that's here also. Why do you need to tell us our 15 arayos? We can count. So the Gemara says, Minyana de Reisha Lemutema, Minyana de Seifa Lemutema. Why do we have these numbers? Says the Gemara, the first one that they want to be mamait, they want to exclude that. You shouldn't think that there's another one. What would be the other one? Limute de Rav. Udaravasi. Who's Rav? What's Rav? I just turned the page on Gimel and Beis. Look at Rashi. De Rav Udaravasi. De Amarav Tzara Sota Asura. It's exactly the case of Tzara Sota, the Rav that we saw in Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Because according to Rav, right, there's an exemption from Chalitza and from Yibum, even in addition to the 15, if it's a Sota or a Tzara Sota. That's what Rashi explains. Amarav, Tzara Sota Asura, Shim Zinsa Ishto, if his wife, Yentl, right, betrayed him, Velo Isha Cheres, and he has an additional wife, Froma, Umeis, and then he dies below Banu without any children. Shteem Pturos. According to Rav, they are exempt from Yibum and Chalitza. So the Mishnah is telling you that even though Rav thinks this, we don't think this, and therefore the Mishnah is excluding Tzaras. So we'll get back to that.
Reuven's need to have separated from his wife after she was a Sota Vadai is Deraisa or Derabanan?
Deraisa.
Okay.
But it's still only, so let me explain the problem with it. Why do the Chachamim disagree? Number one, the paradigm cases of the Mishnah are when the relationship problem is between the Yavam and the woman candidate, not between the husband and the candidate. Right? The problem of Sota, before we get to the Tzara Sota even, the problem of Sota is her relationship with her husband. Not her relationship with the
But
Yavam.
on the other hand, there are many things, including the ksuba and whatever, that we know.
Then we'll get to the ksuba is
relate to falling into the shoes of the
Okay. Okay. No, what you're saying is true in the end of the day. I'm just trying to show you that they're different. It could be better, could be worse.
They have similarities, but they have differences.
They're different. So that's number one. Number two, so let's say number one is the problems in the Mishnah are problems with the Yavam. The problems of Tzaras, of Sota, is a problem with the Baal. That's one. Number two, all the cases of the Mishnah are Chayve Krisos or more or worse. And there's no Tfisas Kiddushin. And one of the reasons that there's no Yibum and Chalitza is because of that, meaning it's Chayve Krisos. The Gemara says that, the Gemara will discuss this, that's coming up. Ase do chalos ase, the ein ase do chalos ase sheyesh bo kares. So, the erva is excluded because there's no tfisas kiddushin, A, and B, there's no ase do chalos ase because it's an alav shel kares. But sota is not a lav shel kares, what I was saying before. Sota is just a regular lav, and you could apply the principle on the surface of ase do chalos ase. Why not?
Are we
now, wait. Now turn to Daf Chaf Amud Aleph for a minute. I'm sorry, we're jumping around a little bit. We're basically
from a clarification. Are we questioning why he can't make Yibum with Yentl, or are we questioning why he can't make Yibum with Fruma?
Both. We're especially
because with Yentl, the logic of Yokum Shem Achiv or whatever, okay, to somebody that the husband would, is not.
No, you're right. You're totally right. If you look at the Gemara in Sota, Daf Amud Aleph.
In other words, I understand Yentl. Yentl is separate from Fruma. Fruma is
right. Put it this way: I'm first trying to show that there are two differences between even Yentl and Bito. Even though it makes sense that you would be, what you're saying, the Gemara says in Sota on Daf Heyomid Aleph in the end. I mean, the Gemara has this discussion. But the comparison is still off. Right? So let me explain why do I say it's off? Because the Gemara Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, the Mishnah on Chaf Amud Aleph says the following. We've seen this Mishnah. Klal Omer b'Yivama. We have a principle when it comes to Yibum, the Mishnah on Chaf Amud Aleph. Kol shi Isur Erva. Anytime we're dealing with an Isur of Erva, meaning Chayve Krisus and beyond, right? Bito,
all the 15.
All the cases in the Mishnah on base. Lo choletzes for lo misyavenes. Right? So then both chalitza and yibum are excluded. However, Isur mitzvah v'Isur kedusha, choletzes for lo misyavenes. What is Isur mitzvah v'Isur kedusha? So the Gemara explains one Isur mitzvah is or Isur kedusha, one of them at least is chayve lavin. For example, a grusha to a Kohen, an almona to a Kohen gadol, right? So that's not chayve krisus, that's chayve lavin. If a Kohen was to marry a grusha, is the kedushin chal? Yes, he's not allowed to do it. It's a prohibition. He's chayv malchus, but the kedushin is chal. You need to get.
Mamzeres would fit in the same category.
Yes, absolutely. So the Gemara actually on Daf Chaf Amud Beis ultimately says not only that, we asay is dochalos asay. So the mitzvah of Yibum should allow you to do Yibum, just so you would only be allowed to do Yibum bia Rishona. They would be able to have one physical encounter for the sake of attempting, lahakim la'achiv shame. But the Gemara says we don't allow that midrabanan. Gozru bia rishona atu bia shnia, and therefore that's where the Mishnah came to the conclusion that there's chalitza, but there's no yibum. So when it comes to chayve lavin, there's chalitza b'li yibum. So the question is, even if sota, right? Even though number one, we said we're talking about yenta for the moment. Number one, the problem in the Mishnah of Erva is with the Yavam. Here, the problem is with the Baal. Okay, maybe you can answer it. The way that you answered it is the right answer. That's kind of what the Gemara says in Sota, but it's still not so obvious. But number two is even less obvious. Number's 2 point about Yentl. Namely, it's Chayve Lavin to the husband. So by extension, it's Chayve Lavin, let's say, or it's even less than Chayve Lavin, but let's say we're projecting the husband onto the brother, but it's still only chayve lavin. Why isn't there chalitza? We'll see in a moment that the Ravid and the Ra'ah thought there was, but Rashi on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph we read before says that there is not. Now let's get to Bruma, the tzara. When do we find the din of tzara serva? When you have one of the 15 women listed in the Mishnah on Beis Amud Aleph, each of which is an erva in the parsha in Achrei Mos of Arayos, correct? So they're in that parsha, and these are the severe. What we're saying is, that creates a tzaras erva, either the way Rashi explains it or the other way. We'll get to that in just a second. Fine. How do you have that without erva for Fruma? Fruma is the co-wife of Yentl. Yentl is the problem one. How do you get a tzaras, the equivalent of tzaras erva here? So the Gemara is actually asking that question. The Gemara says that, well, maybe when the Gemara says my taima tuma ksivba ka'arayos, what does that go on? Does it go on question number 2?
But besides,
does it go on question number 3 or on both?
Besides the list of ervas, the Gemara does give an explanation for why tzaras erva is a problem, because
erva or tzaras sota.
Basically, if you can't do it with one, then you can't do
it. That's what we're saying for Rashi. Good. No, so this is the point I want to make. The Gemara's chiddush about sota is that it's, even though it's not officially an erva, since the Torah uses the expression of tuma, and it's all very loaded, in the sense that what, like you said, it's all goes back to the bigger point that you were making, which is you're going to accomplish lahakim la'achiv shame, you
Yeah.
know, in with a woman. I'm talking about Yentl for the moment, with a woman who betrayed him, who he himself couldn't continue to live with.
Yeah, it's almost like the shore in this girl, the shore that has the what's it called again,
Or worse.
relationship has to be killed
It's
because you don't
tuma.
want.
It sounds like you're learning daf yomi.
Yeah, you don't want the people to remember and everyone to say, oh, you see, this is the animal that had this illicit.
Right, that's what the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, right? Takala v'kala. But yeah, so no, you're right. But it's when it comes to Yentl, it's like, oh, you're going to solve the problems, the brother's legacy problem with his unfaithful wife.
It's like a badge of shame.
Yeah. So that's tuma ksivbo karayos. But is that good enough to create a tzara? That's a big chiddush, right?
No,
Because
no,
it
the
isn't
difference
really.
is that we should require chalitza.
Oh, one second.
Like by all the things the Rabbanan made up, they said, okay, no, but you have to do chalitza.
Well, this is the Raisa, but
No,
it's still only Chayve Lavin, so it's still shocking that there's no Chalitza, right? Okay, but at least according to Rashi, because of Tuma Ksivbo Ke'erva, so we catapult, we raise the problem here, right, to the equivalent of Erva. However, this is what I'm about to tell you. The Ravid and the Ra'ah read the Gemara differently because they were bothered by problem number 2. They just couldn't believe it. So what they said was, if you look on the Marmakomos page,
it was
there,
Fruma that was bothering them, not Yentl.
well, both of them were bothering them. Well, Yentl too. So they couldn't believe that Yentl didn't need chalitza. Why? Because it's still only chayve lavid. So if you look on the Marmakomos, look on page, I think it's on page 3. We have Chidush Ritva Masechet Yevamos Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Everybody have that? I'll wait a second until everybody finds it. Everybody have it in the Marmakomos? It's on page 3. It's called Chidusha Ritva Masachet Yevamos, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Do people have it or not? Can I assume yes?
I have the Gemara. That's all.
Yes.
You don't have the sheet?
No, I don't. I don't have the facility
What daf is
to-
it on?
Yud
Page
Aleph, it's the
3.
Ritva on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. You should be able to print out, by the way, if you don't, since we're doing this on Zoom, you should be able to print out. She always sends out the sheet. If you want to print it out, you should be able to print it out at home.
Yeah, I have to
We
learn
do
how
it every
to-
week. We check it every week.
Yeah. You have to give Sheila a thank you and a credit. She always does such a good job.
Right.
So Chidusha Ritva Yevamos Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. So listen to this. This is in the name of the Ra'ah, but it's also the view of the Ravid. The Yesh Mefarshim de Rav Yehuda Marav Tsaris Sota Asura Lihisyabem Ka'omar Aval Tzricha Chalitza against Rashi. Most of the Rishonim learn like Rashi. The Ravid and the Ra'ah say no. It's the Sota, meaning Yentl,
She
and
creates a
Saras.
problem. She
And
creates a problem.
Sarasota, Fruma, both need chalitza. They're just excluded from Yibum.
In other words, the Yente creates a problem.
Right, but it's not the equivalent of Chayve Krisus. It's still Chayve. Why? Listen to this. The Afilu hi atzma, meaning even Yentl, the Sota herself, never mind Fruma. Why? De Chayve Lavin Bialmahi. She's not chayiv koris, she's only chayiv alav. And we apply the principle of asay do chalos asay. So what does it mean when the Gemara says tuma ksivba? This is sensational. So the Ra'ah says tuma de ksivba, hainu lasos tsarasa kemosa. The word tuma ksivba in the Gemara is to explain not that you treat them like chayiv krisus, which is how Rashi read the Gemara. It's to explain how, like chayiv krisus, there's a din of tsara to begin with. Why is it tsara and sota? It's only chayve lavin. The answer is because even though it's only chayve lavin, and you need chalitza both for yentel and for froma, nonetheless, there's going to be a din of tsara, which is usually reserved for erva, because even though it's chayve lavin, it's tuma, and tuma is ke'erva. Le'osra b'biashniya midaraisa kechayve lavin. So let me ask you the following. If you take Rashi's view, what is Rashi's view of tsaras erva? One more time. Rashi's view of tsaras erva is that because there's an erva, there's no zika. And because there's no zika, every one of the tsaros is what? An eshes achiv shalo b'makom mitzvah sibum. Right? Meaning the erva torpedoes the zika, and without zika, the tsara isn't a tsaras bito. She's not a tsaras achos ishto. She's not a tsaras chamiv. She's not a tsaras achoso. The tsara is an eshes achiv shalom b'makom mitzvah because the erva messed up the zika. So could you say what the Ramban?
And therefore, what's the therefore?
One second.
No chalitza is needed.
Say again.
Therefore, no chalitza is needed.
How then you would have to say that no chalitza is needed. How could you ever have a tsaras?
Because of the rule that wherever there's no yibum, there's no chalitza.
No, because eshes ach. Of course, there's no chalitza. There's no zika. So how could the Ravid and the Ra'ah suggest that you could have an erva, you could have a sota and a tsaras sota where there's chalitza? If the principle of tsaras sota was based on eshasach.
No, but they don't hold that.
That's what I'm trying to prove.
They're basically saying that the chalitza is needed because it's only a technicality, a lav, so why you can't.
Right. So how do they understand tsaras erva or tsaras sota? The answer is it's an associative definite expansion. It's like a virtual erva or a virtual tuma. Meaning they understand that what I'm trying to prove from this case, according to the Ravid and according to the Ra'ah, is that they don't hold like Rashi. If you hold like Rashi, then it's all or nothing. Whenever you can only talk about a tsara when you revert to being eshes ach shelo b'makom mitzvah. But if it's eshes ach shelo b'makom mitzvah, there's no yibum and there's no chalitza. You can't have a situation where there's chalitza but no yibum. However, let's say the pshat isn't eshes ach shelo b'makom mitzvah. Let's say the real pshat of tsaras erva, or in this case, tsaras tuma, is that not only is there an effect, a consequence of erva and tuma, but in some cases, the association with erva and tuma is also toxic, right? It's also, excludes.
Then they have to do a great leap in faith to show that there's such a thing as a tzara related to this concept.
Well, but Rav says there's a tzara for sota. What I just tried to show was Rashi and most Rishonim say that tzara of sota is treated like an erva of krisos, and that's a chiddush in its own right. The Ravid and the Ra'ah didn't like it because they're saying it's still chayve lavin, there's still asay dokalos asay, there still should be chalitza. So they say, you know what, you're right. Both the sota and the tzara sota require chalitza midaraisa. So what I'm trying to show is, then it can't be eshes ach shelo b'makom mitzvah sibum.
Yeah, but the big challenge to the Ravid is how he elevates a chayve lavim to the same status.
No, but so I think the answer to that is simple. It's not simple it's not a simple chiddush, but it's very understandable. That's what he means when he says tumas ke'erva. Just like, because the whole idea, according to them, is not to revert back to eshes ach shelo b'makom mitzvah sibum. is to try to show that sometimes, just like you said before about the mother, the stepmother, right? Meaning she's not really related to you. She's related to you because of the association with your father. So too, in the context of Yibum, associated illicit or inappropriate, bonds, are enough to undermine Yibum.
Except that they have a trouble with the Mishnah, which makes it very clear that it's 15 and no more.
No, so that's why the Mishnah. That's why the Gemara says that it's limuute. Our Mishnah is against Rav. But the truth is that the Ritva who likes the idea of the Ra'ah
Rav can
rejects the
argue.
Ra'ah. By the way,
Rav can argue with the Mishnah, but he can't argue with its Stam Mishnah.
Okay, that's his problem. That's not my problem. But the Ritva had a bigger problem. The Ritva says, I don't think this pshat of the Ra'ah is a good pshat. Because when the Gemara says limuute, that the minion of the Mishnah is memait Rav, then it has to be speaking about the same wavelength. It has to be talking about Yibum and Chalitza. What does the Mishnah say? There are 15 women that what? That are potros, soroseim,
Yeah.
from Chalitza and from Yibum. So the Ra'ah says, the Ritva says to the Ra'ah, like, how do you read the Gemara? That's what these next words mean. The Gemara, he says, the Hod de Parchina b'Shmaita Kamaisa u'larav u'laravasi l'sninu, meaning on Dav Gimel Amud Beis. Agavrieta de Ravasi naktina de Rav. He said,
The Ritva is asking, how can you have one without the other?
No. The Ritva is saying, how could our Gemara say that the minyan of the Mishnah is to exclude Rav? According to Rashi, it makes sense because they're both talking about a P'tur of Yibum and Chalitza. So you could say, it's the same issue, but they don't agree with the case. But according to the Ravid and according to the Ra'ah, it's apples and oranges. The Mishnah is talking about a P'tur of Yibum and Chalitza. What does that have to do with an exclusion of Yibum where there's a chiyuv of Chalitza?
Yeah, that's what I mean. You can't separate one from the other.
Oh, right. If that's what you meant. I didn't realize. Okay. Yeah. So that's why the Ritva says, but there's another case in the Gemara where they agree. I mean, the Ramban and the Ritva, even though they disagree with the Ravid and the Ra'ah. And that's called the case of, I'll just give you another example, Machzir Grushaso. What is Machzir Grushaso? So the Gemara Yud Aleph Beis. We talked about this last year in Gittin. But let's say you have the following scenario. Reuven is married to women, right? Let's keep it at Yentl and Fruma. Right? I think we're doing well with them. So he's married to Yentl, he's married to Fruma. No one betrayed him. But the marriage with Yentl didn't work out so well. So he and Yentl got divorced. So Reuven divorced Yentl, and he's still married to Fruma. Yentl went ahead after the divorce, and she married somebody else. Then she got divorced again. And then Reuven remarried Yentl after the divorce, which he's not allowed to do.
How can he do that? It's against
he's not allowed to.
No.
But the Kiddushin is Chal because it's Chai Be'lavin. So the Kiddushin is Chal, even though it's Be'isr. Okay? Now he's married with a Chai Be'lavin to Yentl, and normally to Fruma, and now he dies without children, and now Shimon is Omeid Liibum of these two women.
But Shimon does not a problem. She's not a problem to Shimon.
Right, but it's the same. So the Gemara says the same idea as Sota. The Gemara says, maybe the Tumah goes on the
except in this case where he's married to her by Isser, the Kiddushin is Chal. Is he allowed to continue to live with her?
No, I mean he every time he is involved with her, he's in violation of Machzor Grushaso. But again, it's
equivalent to the Sota Badai Sota.
It's equivalent to the Sota case. But here, the Ramban and
that's different than a Kohen marrying a convert, right? A Kohen just loses.
Or is a Kohen marrying his own? That's also Chai Be'lavin, but the Kiddushin is talking about Almana.
No,
a Kohen God marrying an Almana or a Kohen marrying a Grusha, yeah.
And every time he lives with
a convert's the same,
right?
What's that?
Every time he lives with her, it's another love.
Yeah. I mean, that's a
And
big
that's what-
discussion whether it's Kidei Shubal, but yeah, basically. So, yeah. So what I'm trying to show is that while the predominant view, and we're going to stop here, while the predominant view of Tsaras Erva, this big Chiddush of Beis Hillel, which is the core of our Mishnah, while the predominant view is like Rashi, which is that the way Tsaras Erva works is that whenever there's an Erva, that eliminates the Zika. Whenever there's no Zika, everybody becomes an Eishes Achiv, Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah. However, there's also a view, a very prominent view in the Rishonim, that disagrees and that thinks that the din of Tsaras Erva is a category. It's an extended category of Erva. I call it Erva by association, virtual Erva by association, meaning if she was co-wives with my sister, with my daughter, with my mother-in-law, with my wife's sister, etc., then that's too close for comfort to in the context of Yibum. And this is something we talked about last time. It may be that in addition, what's unique about Yibum, as opposed to other, the sons-in-law, whatever, things that we spoke, Shalom B'Makom Yibum, two things. Number one, Yibum creates a unit, a kind of like you use the expression, a kat, like a kat with respect to wives that no other institution does, A. And B, and this is something I want to talk more about next time in terms of Abba Shaul, is that Yibum, on the one, has a tremendous kula because you're marrying Eishes Ach, who normally is prohibited, for the goal of Lahakim La'akiv Shem. But it's also imposes an overcompensated chumrah. And that is that we're even more hypersensitive in the context of Yibum, that everything else be done, Kedasu, Kedin, on a Kedusha level, and therefore maybe even the whiff, even the confusion, the association of Tumah or Erva is enough to undermine the mitzvah of Yibum. The mitzvah of Yibum is a tremendous kula, but that kula itself requires that we never lose sight.
Slope, so you have to be very precise in carrying it out according to the way it has to be carried out.
So next week we'll talk a little bit about Abba Shaul, who we've spoken about before. But I want to talk more about it. Abba Shaul's idea that you need, a perfect kind of, lishma attitude.
To be the shema, right?
That's on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph, and then we're going to speak about Erva itself.
Which also comes back to the fundamental question as to whether it's an option Yibum and Chalitza, or whether Yibum is the preferred and Chalitza is the.
Yeah, that's part of the Abba Shaul talk. So we'll speak a little bit, not completely, but a little bit about that next week, and then we want to talk about the Gemara's Havamina, that maybe you would have thought that Erva would be overridden for Yibum too. And Hutra Dechuya. So there are a number of good topics that we're coming up to on the bottom.
I'm looking forward.
And Gimel Amud, so that will be continued next week.
All right.
Shkar. Thank you.
Good
Good week, everybody.
We have to thank Rabbi Gershon to a large extent.
What?
We have to thank Rabbi Gershon. I'm talking about to a large extent, because there are not two wives. There's no issue of
Oh. It's a great point. Right. Imagine if he had come too early, we wouldn't be able to discuss all these fascinating cases.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, we thank him, but on the other hand, it's good that it happened later so we could discuss it all.
Yeah, that's right. But yashar koach, a big yashar koach.
Okay, good to see you all.
Call tools.
Night.